An elderly man wearing a worn military cap slowly ascends the steps of the Providence Municipal Court. His hands tremble as he clutches the railing, yet his posture reflects quiet dignity. William Patterson, age 72, resembles countless other veterans who have stood before Judge Caprio. However, what he is about to share will mark one of the most touching moments in the judge's 40-year career. Before we get into this remarkable story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're close to reaching 15,000 subscribers, and 98% of viewers still haven't subscribed. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Welcome to Judge's Story. It was Tuesday morning, November 8th. The Providence Municipal Court moved through its usual pace. Judge Frank Caprio, now 86, had witnessed nearly everything over the years, from speeding fines and parking violations to every excuse imaginable. The courtroom gallery was filled with the typical range of defendants. But at 10:23 a.m., someone extraordinary stepped through those doors. William Patterson walked down the courthouse aisle slowly but with purpose. At 72, he still carried the unmistakable posture of a lifelong military man, even if age and hardship had clearly left their mark. His faded Vietnam veteran cap was neatly kept, his khaki pants pressed, and his white shirt carefully tucked in, despite the faint tremor in his hands. But it wasn't just his disciplined appearance that caught Judge Caprio's attention. There was something deeper in William's eyes, a heaviness that went beyond the nervousness seen in most defendants. He looked like a man burdened by something far more personal than a parking violation. Court reporter Lisa Martinez, who had chronicled Judge Caprio's hearings for nearly 2 decades, noticed him right away. Unlike other defendants who fidgeted or whispered nervously, William sat completely still. His weathered hands rested on his lap, and every so often, he touched his left forearm through his shirt sleeve, an unconscious motion that hinted at something unspoken. Others in the courtroom noticed him too. Veterans often recognize one another, and a few nodded quietly in respect. Yet William remained distant, lost in thought, his gaze unfocused, as if he were seeing something beyond the courtroom walls. At precisely 10:45 a.m., Bailiff Officer Santos called out, "The State of Rhode Island versus William Robert Patterson, case number 2022, PV 9156, illegal parking in a handicapped zone." William rose with deliberate care, the kind of movement shaped by years of discipline and endurance. His body might have weakened, but his sense of dignity had not. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Caprio said, his tone calm yet authoritative, the same gentle command that made him respected both in his courtroom and among viewers worldwide. "William Robert Patterson, Your Honor," the man replied. His voice was steady but quiet, marked by the crisp rhythm of someone shaped by military life and tinged with a faint Boston accent that hinted he'd lived in Rhode Island for many years. "Mr. Patterson," Caprio continued, glancing at the document before him, "according to this citation, you parked in a handicapped space at the VA Medical Center on October 15th without the proper permit. How do you plead to this charge?" "Guilty, Your Honor," William said without hesitation. "I parked illegally and I take full responsibility." Judge Caprio paused for a moment. The mention of the VA Medical Center and William's demeanor suggested there was more to this case than a simple parking violation. "Now, we're getting to the heart of something meaningful," Caprio remarked. "And if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, go ahead and like this video. Stories like this deserve to be heard." He turned his attention back to the man before him. "Mr. Patterson, I see your veteran's cap. Which branch of the service were you in?" "Army, Your Honor," William responded, his posture straightening slightly. 2 tours in Iraq from 2003 to 2007. As he spoke, the pride in his voice was clear, though it carried an undertone of hardship. Judge Caprio felt a familiar mix of respect and curiosity, an understanding that behind this minor violation might lie a much deeper story. Over his many years on the bench, Judge Caprio had learned that veterans often carried stories that extended far beyond the simple cases that brought them into court. "Mr. Patterson," he began, "can you explain the situation that led to this parking violation? The citation shows you were at the VA Medical Center." For the first time, William's composed expression faltered. Judge Caprio noticed something flicker across his face. Not guilt or defiance, but a deep, restrained sorrow. "Your Honor," he said quietly, I was there for my monthly appointment with my VA psychologist. The parking lot was full and I couldn't walk the extra distance from the regular spaces. My hands were shaking too much that day. Judge Caprio observed the subtle tremor in William's hands as he spoke, but more telling was the heaviness in his tone when he mentioned the psychological appointment. "Mr. Patterson," the judge asked gently, "if you don't mind sharing, do you have a disability that would qualify you for handicapped parking?" Williams paused for a long moment, clearly weighing how much of his story to reveal in a public courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. "Your Honor, I have PTSD from my service in Iraq." The courtroom fell silent. This was no longer about a parking citation. It was about a veteran quietly battling unseen scars. Too proud to label himself as disabled, Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, understanding that this case was about much more than a ticket. Something about William's demeanor, how he kept touching his left forearm, the distant look in his eyes, and the deliberate way he chose his words, hinted that there was more to his story than he was saying. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Caprio began, 20 years is a long time to live with PTSD. Could you share what happened during your service that led to these ongoing struggles?" William's hand again moved toward his left forearm, almost unconsciously. Judge Caprio noticed the gesture had become more frequent as the discussion grew more personal. "Your Honor," William started quietly, "I served as a squad leader in the Army's 1st Infantry Division. My unit handled convoy security and patrol missions in the Anbar province. On March 15, 2006, during what was supposed to be a routine patrol, we were struck by an IED. The courtroom fell completely silent. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. "I lost my entire squad that day," William continued, his voice tightening. 7 men under my command, 7 soldiers who trusted me to bring them home. I was thrown clear of the explosion, but they didn't make it. I was the only survivor." His voice trembled now. "For 20 years I've asked myself why I lived when they didn't." Judge Caprio felt a wave of emotion as he listened, realizing the immense burden this man had carried for 2 decades, the guilt of surviving when his brothers in arms had not. "Mr. Patterson, I can see this is very hard for you to discuss. Is this the reason you've been seeing the VA psychologist for the past 20 years? "Yes, Your Honor, but talking about it has never made it easier. Every month I attend that session, and each time, Mr. Patterson, I've noticed you keep touching your left arm. Is there something about it that relates to what you're sharing?" William looked up at Judge Caprio, his face showing surprise and perhaps a sense of relief. For 2 decades he had carried a burden no one had ever asked him about so directly. "Your Honor, when I came back from Iraq, I did something my family and the VA counselors don't know about. Something I've hidden for 20 years. The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with tension. Judge Caprio could tell he was about to hear something deeply personal that William had never revealed before. "What did you do, Mr. Patterson?" William began slowly rolling up his left sleeve, his hands trembling more with each movement. As the fabric rose, a detailed black tattoo came into view. "Your Honor, I had all 7 of their names tattooed on my arm. Every soldier who died under my command, their names, ages, the day they fell, and a small cross for each one." The courtroom fell silent as William rolled up his sleeve, revealing a memorial tattoo that stretched across his forearm. 7 names, beautifully inscribed, were surrounded by military emblems and crosses, a lasting tribute to his fallen brothers in arms. "But that's not all, Your Honor," William said softly. His hand shook as he took a small, worn photograph from his wallet. "This is Sergeant Marcus Thompson. He was my point man, my closest friend in the unit. 22 years old, married to his high school sweetheart. He had a baby girl he never got to hold." Judge Caprio noticed that the photo had been carried for so long that its corners had nearly faded away. "Your Honor," William continued, his voice trembling, "right before our last patrol, Marcus made me promise something. He said, 'Sarge, if anything happens to me, promise you'll make sure people never forget us. Promise you'll remember all of us.'" His voice cracked completely as he added, "Yes, Your Honor. Every month when I see Dr. Morrison, she asks about my survivor's guilt, why I can't move on. But I can't tell her about the tattoos, the photo, or the promise, because if I did, she'd tell me to let go of Marcus and the others. And letting go would mean breaking my word." Judge Caprio sat quietly, realizing he was witnessing one of the deepest acts of loyalty and devotion he had ever seen. William Patterson carried not only survivor's guilt, but also the heavy burden of a sacred promise to never forget his fallen comrades. Mr. Patterson, Judge Caprio began, on the day you received this parking ticket, what was your emotional state during your VA appointment? Your Honor, William replied, it was the 20th anniversary of the IED explosion. Dr. Morrison was urging me more than usual to let go of the guilt, to accept that what happened wasn't my fault. But how can I move on when I promised Marcus I'd never forget? How can I believe it wasn't my fault when I was the squad leader? William's hand instinctively went to his forearm. This time, he rolled up his sleeve a little higher, revealing more of the tattoo that served as a memorial to his brothers in arms. Your Honor, after that appointment, I was so shaken I could barely stand. My hands were trembling worse than usual and my eyes were filled with tears. I just needed to reach my car before I completely broke down. That's why I parked in the handicapped space, not for special treatment, but because I physically couldn't take another step. Judge Caprio rose from his bench, something he almost never did in court. The gravity of William's words had moved him beyond the limits of judicial formality. Mr. Patterson, he said, in my 40 years on this bench, I have never heard a story that captures the essence of brotherhood, loyalty, and sacrifice as powerfully as yours. He stepped down from the bench, approaching William directly, abandoning the traditional distance between judge and citizen. Judge Caprio leaned forward, speaking not from his bench but from a place of shared humanity. Mr. Patterson, you have spent 2 decades honoring a promise made to a dying friend. For 20 years you've carried their memory not just in your heart, but through your actions. I want everyone in this courtroom to recognize what we're witnessing today. He paused briefly, then continued, his voice steady yet filled with respect. We're looking at a man who has turned his very life into a living tribute to his fallen brothers. A man who has kept a sacred vow for 20 years, even when doing so meant enduring immense pain. The judge's tone carried the moral clarity that had made his courtroom known for compassion and justice. Now I want to address what occurred at the VA that day. You weren't seeking privilege or trying to evade responsibility. You were a man facing the 20th anniversary of losing 7 soldiers under your command, breaking down in the parking lot of the very place where you were once told to move on. Judge Caprio allowed a moment of silence before concluding. Mr. Patterson, regarding the parking citation that brought you before this court, every charge is dismissed. All fines are waived and this citation will be erased from your record. As his words settled, the courtroom broke into spontaneous applause. But Judge Caprio wasn't quite done speaking. But more importantly, I want you to understand something. The promise you made to Sergeant Thompson was never a secret burden you had to bear alone. It was a sacred commitment, one that reflects the true spirit of military brotherhood. Judge Caprio turned to the audience, speaking not just to William but to everyone in the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we live in a world that often tells veterans to move on and leave their past behind. But William Patterson reminds us that some promises are too meaningful to abandon, and some memories deserve to be preserved. The applause continued as Judge Caprio made a closing statement that stayed with everyone who witnessed it. Mr. Patterson, he said, I want you to visit Dr. Morrison again and show her that tattoo. Tell her about the promise you made to Marcus Thompson, because honoring your fallen brothers is part of healing. 6 months later, William returned to court not as a defendant, but to thank Judge Caprio and share something extraordinary. He had launched a non-profit organization that designs memorial tattoos for veterans wishing to honor their fallen comrades. His VA psychologist now supported his mission, helping him use his experience to guide other veterans through their grief. And that, Judge Caprio concluded, is the real message of this remarkable story. William Patterson reminded us that certain promises are too meaningful to break, and some memories deserve to be preserved forever. He showed that true healing isn't always about moving on. It can be about finding purpose through remembrance. William Patterson served his nation in one of the most perilous war zones of modern times, but his greatest act of service began after returning home, when he chose to honor his fallen comrades every single day for 2 decades. That's more than loyalty. It's love that endures beyond death. If this story touched your heart, do 2 simple things right now. First, subscribe to our channel. where we share stories that celebrate veterans and reveal the true meaning of brotherhood. Second, take a moment to reflect on the promises you've made to those you care about, and ask yourself if you're keeping them with the same dedication William showed. Because sometimes, keeping a promise means carrying a burden others may never understand. Yet, as William Patterson proved, some promises are worth carrying for a lifetime. Thank you for watching. And remember, we honor the fallen by never forgetting their sacrifice.